Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to the Action Channel. So today we're going to celebrate one of our many great legendary action stars from the 1980s and 90s. And today we're going to focus on Steve James, who today actually would have turned 72 years old. Now unfortunately the man passed away in 1993 at the age of just 41. But he left a serious mark on the action genre. So today, let's take a look. Anyway guys, if you like this kind of content, action movies from the 80s and 90s and just action altogether, martial arts, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, let's get into it. So Steve James is probably best known for the American Ninja movies in which he played Jackson. And he played Michael Dudikoff's sidekick and buddy in 3 films. And Michael Dudikoff did not appear in number 3, but he did return in number 4. But in the first 3 American Ninja movies, we had Steve James as Jackson. And he was badass in that role. In fact, Michael Dudikoff and Steve James did such a great job in the first American Ninja. And they have this sort of, I guess you consider it, bromance, because they were so awesome together. So Steve James and Michael Dudikoff did 3 movies together. American Ninja 1 and 2, and in between they also did the Avenging Force. Because after the success of the first one, they realized, these 2 guys are awesome together. So, and you can pretty much tell that in the movie, the first one, as well as the second one, they just had this great chemistry. The Cannon Group that was big in the 1980s for producing action-adventure movies was also behind American Ninja from 1985. The movie introduced Michael Dudikoff to the world as a new action star. Steve James also impressed the world with his performance as this macho tough guy, Corporal Curtis Jackson. The movie was a smash hit, and literally 5 minutes after the movie opened, Cannon Film could smell a lot of money and potential, so they started preparing for a sequel. However, before they could develop a script, they already had another movie for our 2 friends here. And yes, that was Avenging Force. This movie not only united Michael Dudikoff and Steve James, but also the director of American Ninja, Samuel Furstenberg. In Avenging Force, our 2 leading men here had the chance to work together on more difficult scenes. This film has the whole revenge thing going on. Steve James' son is being murdered, and now our 2 heroes here want some serious payback. And this is just the beginning. Now, of course, I hate getting all political because, it tends to piss people off. So I hate this whole talking about gender, skin color, blah, 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 at least in 2024. But back in the day, in the 1980s, there really had not been seen a whole lot of, we didn't see that many black action stars in films. The only one I can think of was probably Carl Weathers that played Apollo Creed, also in the 80s. And then, of course, Steve James. Other than that, I don't think we really had anyone. It wasn't until the early 90s that Wesley Snipes came along. And I think there's a lot of similarities between Wesley Snipes as well as Steve James. Because they both had this sort of they were full of energy, they could act, they both had a great sense of humor, which of course you see on screen. But they also had this physical ability, and they were both into martial arts. So I think sort of Steve James was sort of Wesley Snipes before Wesley Snipes. Of course, Wesley took it, I guess, to another level in the 90s and all that stuff with Passenger 57 and I guess the Blade movies. Though I have to say though, there was one guy that actually probably was the first real black action star, and that was Richard Roundtree as Shaft. So I would say if you went to the movies back in 1971 when Shaft came out, and you were to catch a double feature, you probably should go and see Shaft, followed by Dirty Harry, that also came out that year. So those were good times. But other than that, I don't think we had any black action stars, really. So Steve James, in many ways, was way ahead of his time. Now, unfortunately, they never really hired him as the main guy, the leading actor. I would say he always played sort of the sidekick to Michael Dudikoff or David Bradley that appeared in American Ninja 3. But he was so awesome, Steve James. And many times he was actually better, even though he was just the buddy or the sidekick, because he was great. And if he had not died, I think he would have been able to take it to a whole nother level, at least in the 90s. And he did so much more than just action. He also did comedy. I mean, you saw him in Weekend at Bernie's Part 2. Now, the sequel wasn't that great. The first one was awesome. The sequel just wasn't that great. But Steve James was awesome in it, and he was hilarious. And I always remember him as being the best from that movie. Now, that movie came out in 1993, which was actually the same year that he passed away. And sadly enough, yeah, he passed away from pancreatic cancer, which is, I believe, is like a 95% death rate. Patrick Swayze, I believe, also died from pancreatic cancer. And also Steve Jobs. He survived it though. He beat it the first time, but then it came back about a decade later, and then it killed him off. So it's a very, very ugly disease. So even Steve James, being relatively young, strong, active, happy, energetic, all that stuff, he still was no match for this ugly disease. Okay, so we all have some role models in this world, especially you grew up watching all these great action movies, you know, Rambo, or even way back when you'd be reading the comic books, you know, like the Hulk and Superman and all that stuff. So let's ask this question. Who do you think was Steve James' role models growing up, as well as who was his true heroes in the 1980s while he was making action movies himself? So here's what Steve James has to say. I don't like getting beat up much in films, but Jackie Chan could beat me up anytime. My first influence was Bruce Lee, and then I saw Jackie afterwards, and it was entirely different. When people ask me who I think is the best action star, I don't say Stallone, I don't say Schwarzenegger, I say Jackie. He's my influence. I learned from him, that's why I'm here. I think we can all agree that the actors that Steve James mentioned are all first-class action guys. However, I was a little surprised that he was so influenced by Jackie Chan. Obviously, Jackie is the king, but Steve James was more of a muscle man. And of course, he looked so tough and powerful on screen. However, to some of you hardcore fans out there, I actually have a little inside info that you may not even be aware of. This is a quick little story that I've heard from Michael Dudikoff himself, so I'm not questioning the source in regards to what happened on the set of American Ninja 2 that was shot in South Africa. In the beginning of the film, there is a scene where Steve James and Michael Dudikoff are running away from a bunch of ninjas on a beach, and then they make this big jump and end up in a boat. Now, in the stunt itself, they were just supposed to jump and land in the water and swim to shore, or have a boat pick them up. However, on the day of the shooting, Michael Dudikoff and Steve James were standing there getting ready to jump, when all of a sudden Steve James turned to Michael Dudikoff and said, "You know what? I cannot swim." Dudikoff was like, "What?" So anyway, they called up Steve James' stunt double and wanted him to perform the stunt, when they all realized that the stuntman could not swim either. So they were faced with a serious challenge. Michael Dudikoff then turned to Steve and said, "Hey, you know what? We both jump out, and when we land in the water, I will help you get up and get to shore. How's that?" Steve James didn't really have much of a choice, and they ended up doing it, and it worked out fine. So even though Steve James looked like Superman here, he still had an Achilles heel, and he could not swim. Alright guys, thanks for checking in here today and for watching the whole video and for supporting the action heroes of the 80s and 90s. Please do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment, but most importantly, let me know what kind of action stars you want me to focus on next, or just what kind of videos. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Have a nice day now.